Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into some absolutely fascinating sociological insights from Professor Zhang. And honestly, these findings are going to challenge pretty much everything we thought we knew about socioeconomic mobility and how our futures are actually shaped. If you've ever found yourself totally frustrated by the economy, wondering why the wealth gap just seems literally impossible to close, well, this explainer is going to shed a ton of light on what's really going on behind the scenes. Okay, so let's just rip the Band-Aid off and look at a pretty jarring reality from macroeconomic studies. Doing well in school, it really doesn't matter all that much. I know, it's super tough to hear, but according to the data, this whole idea that getting good grades is the ultimate grade equalizer just doesn't hold up in the real world. What this boils down to is that parental wealth, not your education, is what actually dictates a child's ultimate socioeconomic destiny. Statistically speaking, if your parents are rich, you're going to be successful in life. If they're poor, you're likely not going to be. It's your starting line, not your report card, that really calls the shots for your future. Section 1. 3 major parenting differences. To figure out why this wealth gap is so incredibly stubborn, we actually have to look inside the home. We need to examine the day-to-day strategic differences in how rich and poor parents are actually raising their kids. The first major difference? Vocabulary. Rich parents simply talk to their kids a whole lot more. They use a much higher vocabulary and string together longer, more complex sentences. Now compare that to poorer households where communication often just boils down to stark brevity. You hear a lot of short directives like no, yes, or go away. So right from day one, it's a completely different linguistic environment. And that flows right into the second difference, attitude. Rich parents generally lean into this very friendly, conversational approach with their kids. Poor parents, mostly out of necessity, often have to rely on a much more authoritarian or command-based style. Picture this. Let's put it into context. Imagine a child touches a hot stove and burns their hand. A rich parent will typically take a significant amount of time to explain the consequences and the actual mechanics of why it hurt. They'll use a warm, patient tone and say something like, "Listen, you made a mistake, don't worry about it. Let me explain to you why touching a fire is bad, because you'll burn yourself and we might have to go to the doctor." It turns into this calm, learning moment rooted in logic and support. Now flip the script to a poor household. The contrast is pretty harsh. A poor parent usually skips the whole explanation entirely. Instead, they use a strict authoritarian command like, "Don't you ever do that again or I'll beat the crap out of you." They use that severe tone to make absolutely sure the child learns the boundary immediately and never repeats the dangerous action. It's highly effective, but man, it creates a totally different emotional atmosphere. Which brings us to the third big difference, stability. Having wealth inherently gives parents the ability to keep their promises. Like, if a rich parent promises a vacation to Thailand, they just go buy the tickets. But a lack of money inherently forces poor parents to offer volatility. They might promise a fun trip to McDonald's, but hey, if the paycheck falls short that week, the trip just has to get canceled. It's not a lack of love at all. It's literally just a lack of resources, forcing these broken promises. Section 2. Worldviews and school behavior. This is where all the pieces start connecting. As a direct result of these different parenting styles, kids develop completely divergent worldviews. The rich child learns that the world is a safe place and that they are respected. But the poor child, they develop a worldview deeply rooted in fear and stress. They start believing the world is scary and that adults are figures you need to be afraid of. So what actually happens when these kids show up for their first day of school? Well, the rich kid naturally makes friends with the teacher. They smile, they hug them because in their mind, the teacher is a friend. But the poor kid's fear response kicks in. They're stressed, they're afraid to even make eye contact with the teacher, and because they come off looking uncooperative, they almost instantly get slapped with the label of being a problem child. And here is the absolute most critical takeaway. These poor kids are being completely rational. They aren't stupid, and they certainly aren't malicious. They're behaving 100% logically based on these stressful, fearful circumstances they've been raised in. They are literally just surviving their environment. Section 3. The reality of resilience. You know, we hear the word resilience thrown around constantly in education circles, but we might actually be looking at it entirely backwards. Professor Zhang redefines resilience completely. He says it's not some sort of inherent, built-in mental toughness. No, resilience is simply the belief that the world will help you. It's having the confidence that there's a safety net waiting to catch you when you fall. And this perfectly explains why kids react so differently to failure. If you come from wealth, Failing is just a temporary stumble. You know someone is going to help you get back up on your feet. But if you're poor, failure is a totally rational signal to just stop trying, because deep down, you know no help is coming. It's an accurate assessment of your own risk, not some lack of grit. Taking in all these massive systemic differences, you're probably sitting there wondering, okay, can better schools actually fix this? If we know the root of the problem is early environmental differences, can't we just redesign our educational systems to completely counteract them? Section 4. Why the cycle persists. We have honestly tried throwing the kitchen sink at this. Traditional policy interventions and super well-meaning educational reforms just consistently fail to break this generational loop. We've actually tried constructing schools around better parenting skills. We've built programs to expose kids to higher vocabulary, train teachers to act exceedingly funly, and created highly structured, high-stability environments to fight against the volatility they experience at home. But here is the truly heartbreaking reality: it really doesn't work. Why? Because the kids are entering the system way too late. By the time a child actually steps foot in a kindergarten classroom, their fundamental, fearful worldview is already permanently established and totally locked in. So naturally you think, okay, let's go straight to the source and change how the parents behave, right? Well, you quickly realize you cannot alter their fundamental circumstances or behaviors either. Their parenting style is just a rational survival response to the overwhelming, crushing stress and lack of resources in their daily lives. You just can't teach away the stress of poverty. Which brings us to the very sobering bottom line. We are left with a system where, despite our absolute best educational efforts and interventions, massive differences remain. The rich stay rich, and the poor stay poor. It really leaves us with a profound, almost uncomfortable question to think about. If the game is effectively decided by a child's worldview before they even learn to read their very first book, how on earth do we ever genuinely break this cycle?